Good morning. Edit all. Okay. All right. Rachel, are you there? Hi. Oh, I need to unmute you. Maybe. Are you able to unmute yourself, Rachel?
Yeah, I'm unmuted now.
Oh, terrific. Okay. So I have made you a co-host, and I'm hoping that this will work well for both Scribe and possibly for news. What that should mean, I'm going to try to pass this piece of the class baton to you, is that you can monitor the chat room, which we can all, I think we're all familiar with the chat room by now, but that additionally you can admit people to the meeting. And I'm hoping that this will be something that you can keep tabs on in the event that I might miss something. So if somebody gets the boot for whatever reason, just let me know. I think we're now 14. So Rachel, I'm gonna have you, presumably we'll get a couple more people here. Hopefully we will. You should see sort of an orange thing light up saying so-and-so wants to be admitted. You should be able to admit them. So this is our great experiment for the morning. All right, okay.
Okay.
So it is, oh, I think it's coming. Do you see that coming once in?
No.
Oh, all right. Co-host powers may be limited. That's right.
Okay. I
But
also
in any
could
event,
just be looking
the
at my own
co-host, you
place.
should be able to share your screen at some point. Now, I've pulled up your news, so you may not need to do that, but I just want to see to what extent we can make this work for us.
Okay.
Okay, let's get going. I see almost everybody's faces. I see a few names as well. So I'm assuming that you will raise your virtual hand or let me know otherwise if there's any audio issues. Yeah, let's get cracking. We've got some good news today. Okay.
Should I just start, or are you gonna share
Sure,
this?
yeah, I'm sharing my screen now.
No, my internet connection is unstable. Okay, yeah. So basically, I was like trying to find an article that had to do with St. Louis specifically, since we talked about that a lot.
Yeah.
And I was trying to find one that had to do with like the response now compared to in 1918.
Yeah.
But most of those articles were like pretty much just talking about 1918. They didn't really have any good like applications to today. But they had an article about St. Louis area parks, which I thought was fun because we had literally just talked about that in class, about how like Forest Park had been really busy that other weekend.
Right.
So that did not go unnoticed by officials. So they started restricting access to a lot of these public spaces. Specifically in the city, the like public playgrounds were already closed on like Friday, I believe, like last Friday. But this Sunday, they decided to close a lot of other like public spaces. So that was more specifically like the tennis courts or basketball courts and stuff that a lot of people were collecting at. And so the article just kind of talks about like the rationale behind that choice and has like a lot of quotes from St. Louis citizens about like their opinion on like whether this is a risk or not. A lot of them were very like, I think it's fine. We stayed far apart. But if you look at the images, like there are people quite close to each other.
There's another one.
So yeah, like if you scroll at the bottom, they have like pictures of a lot of major St. Louis parks, and just like how busy they were this like the weekend before, I think. Yeah, like you can see there's people biking and stuff. So all this stuff is like really restricted now. Like people can't go on basketball courts
Mm,
anymore. And the city playgrounds, which is like the next image below, those were already closed on Friday.
mhm.
But yeah, I thought it was like very relevant to what
Yeah.
we had talked about in class.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you
New
for this.
York is actually like not doing that. Yeah, it's like I don't know. I thought it was cool that St. Louis did that. Honestly.
You mean to close the parks?
Yeah, because New York like hasn't really. I'm in New York now, and I used to live
Mm,
in St. Louis. I like
mhm.
literally moved to New York like over spring break. But
When you
so
say
New
you
York
used to
like
live in
has
St. Louis, do you mean it? What do you mean by that? In a
like
way
I
that,
grew up in the suburbs of St.
oh,
Louis.
okay. Okay.
Yeah, but we moved to New York this year, and so New York like hasn't really done this.
Mhm,
And there's like a lot of video on the news of people just like collecting in really
mhm,
large gatherings in parks and
mhm,
stuff. Um, but like especially in the city, and the mayor like has said he doesn't want to close parks.
mhm,
So it's like a very opposite response.
mhm. I've heard talk, and again, I'm going to contradict myself with my general advice moving forward to us as a group of, rather than sort of hearsay saying, oh, did you see the one about, or have you heard that? Well, in general, I would like us to qualify things with sort of evidence of some sort, but I have actually heard that there is talk of opening some streets uh, for play for kids and whatnot when parks are closed, that might be a way of um, spreading out the kind of outdoor converging on parks. But I don't know. I actually don't know if that's happening in New York. I was
Rachel,
among. I sort of went biking on Sunday with I think the rest of Missouri. It seems like it was so gorgeous, and I immediately was aware that this was going to be a challenge because not only was it for the first very well, maybe second very nice spring day, but with the feeling of having been cooped up, I think there was a tendency to figure, oh, my bike's about 6 feet long, so as long as I'm not riding on the tail of somebody else, it's okay. But I absolutely this one actually gets me in for a different sort of reason. This image of people playing pickup basketball in semi-related news. I've been reading about the sense that a lot of people have these days that they don't have time. They don't have as much time as they used to. This notion that we're trying to do too much and always busy, and that there's a lot of sort of moralizing that goes on around leisure or so-called idleness. And one of the areas that sort of cited by this name escapes me right now, but a sociologist that I've been reading who's thinking about this was pickup basketball games. The idea that things would happen spontaneously, that people have time or take time for things like this, these types of community interactions. And so I feel this funny tug on my heart when I see this picture thinking, oh, isn't it great that at least somebody is still trying to, to engage in this type of sociality, but yeah, maybe not right now. But I wonder for you, sort of as a group, if there are moments just in this sort of reduced stimulation time that you've had to think about what feels really important, or what I'm already making lists of things I want to do differently or better when we come out of this, just something I've been thinking about in terms of how we spend our time and what we decide is what we actually think we have time for when you take out things like commuting and the hustle and bustle of going here and there. Thank you for this, Rachel. So you've got one, two, was there a third
I have
article?
a
Oh,
question.
this is, yeah, that sounds like Connor. Was that Connor?
Yeah, when did they close the parks?
In St. Louis?
Like, what was that? Just a couple days ago, I guess. I guess.
Well, this is actually news to me because I wasn't in Forest Park yesterday, but I didn't see any of these signs. The only signs that I saw on the biking trail, now granted, this is not in Forest Park. I was out on Grant's Trail, which is a much longer stretch, and maybe there were a lot of signs that said, enjoy the fresh air safely, but without specifics. They didn't say, make sure you stay X distance away or wear a mask. And in fact, I only saw one mask out of hundreds of runners and cyclists. But Rachel, what does your actual?
Yeah, I think the main thing is a lot of it right now is primarily in the city. So like the playground thing on Friday was specifically for St. Louis City. So like because the county and the city are not one entity, like the same restrictions don't apply to every area. And then on Sunday, it was specifically like basketball courts, tennis courts, those kinds of things. And then I think in like large parks like that, they're just trying to like put up signs discouraging people from gathering in groups, but they haven't necessarily like completely shut down like all of Forest Park, especially because that'd be really hard to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw it on Twitter from Mayor Cruz, and I was like pulled it back up. It was March 29th, so Sunday they closed it off.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I talked to this one graduate student yesterday, and he said that a lot of people are just like doing park stuff on campus. Like they've kind of made campus and it's like a public park.
Yeah. Yes, I have heard
because no one else is there, you know.
You should go, right? This again, this counterintuitive is exactly the opposite of everything we're being told. The chancellor's sending, us emails with images of his completely empty office saying, this is what your office should look like. Don't be here. And then people on the street saying, have you been to campus recently? It's gorgeous. Nobody knows how to do this, huh? Okay, yeah, this is, well, for those of you who are Wash U sick right now, hopefully this, well.
I also didn't think there were basketball courts in St. Louis parks. I thought like that was a whole thing, that there were no basketball courts in any of the St. Louis.
I actually want to know exactly where that was.
I actually have no idea. I just know the article said basketball courts.
Yeah, no, clearly like that said Beckett Park.
Yeah.
But I remember learning, I felt like in one of my classes that like St. Louis public parks they'd like always restricted adding basketball courts to Forest Park, and like similarly in a lot of other parks, because like the typical like they like always like phrase it as like it's too noisy or attracts large groups, but it's like super racially divisive.
I think they have a cricket court or something somewhere in Forest Park. So there's ample evidence that perhaps the park is not actually terribly inclusive just yet, but we may get there. I mean, I really think there's going to be a lot of, we have this, I have, maybe it's just a moment of optimism I'm having, but this possibility that we'll rethink all kinds of uses of public space, and sort of this is bringing into relief, I suppose, lots of questions about mobility, and yeah, who green space is for and how it can be used equitably. So yeah, well, I've moved your faces, not your faces are covering my tabs. I want to keep your faces front and center. There we go. Thank you, Rachel, for this. And Rachel, you are also on scribe duty, right? You're good with that?
Yeah.
Terrific. Okay. So cross out some of this news. Something that, I guess while we're on the subject of news, we might just take a few minutes before jumping into our articles for today. And I think I'm going to use the breakout rooms to do this. We are, I believe, 16 at the moment, so we'll do 4 groups of 4. This is an article that I had posted a while back, and it's dated March 10, so you can see it was so updated March 19. It's an interesting piece that I am absolutely obsessed with at this point, not even anymore because of the content, but really because, and the content was what got my attention initially, but because I do not know what to make of this as a source. And I know we talked quite a lot about critical source evaluation, but I'll just return your attention for a moment to these LibGuides that are at the top of our news section. And I wanted to ask you to spend a few minutes thinking about, well, first I should ask, and I'm gonna have to expand this so I can see everybody's hands, but are you familiar with the source? That's something that you've been, that's been coming across your social media feeds, or that perhaps you've looked at otherwise? I'm seeing a yes from Kami. Actually, if I can't see your faces now, so if you could just unmute yourself and let me know if this is familiar.
This was one of the first articles I read when I was trying to
Yeah.
the whole picture on what's happening.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's been updated for 2 weeks.
Yeah, so it has been a little while at this point, and it's of course the thing that's so compelling about it, I think, is certainly the graphics. And this was given, so March 10, that feels like a million years ago at this point, but particularly as debates around the value of social distancing or sort of when to start social distancing were being discussed. I'm scrolling all the way to the bottom here to just show you this. So we have Tomas Puello, an engineer, somebody who runs an online learning company, which seems quite salient at this time. But if you look at the number of languages that this article has been translated into, and this is being done very grassroots, but every time I check it, there's another language on this list. And he's truly crowdsourcing, sort of asking for people who are fluent in these languages to help him translate this piece. But without saying more about it for the moment, I'll just show you this. This is what got me, where I was thinking, you know, I had relatives who were saying, oh, I'll start social distancing on Monday, you know, on Friday. I'm looking at this thinking, And to the extent that some of the spread and so forth in the United States has been following, say, Italian models or other graphics that he provides, I was very curious about this because I wanted to share it with you or with anyone who might be more versed in statistics or epidemiology to say, well, this is really compelling stuff, but how valid is it? Do I trust this? What do I make of this? And so that's the part that I'm very curious about now, because I think it's just best practice for us to all be skeptical. And so this is posted, where is it posted? Just about here. I think I'm posting too much news. There it is. I posted it on Thursday where we didn't end up getting to it. But I'd like for you, I'll break you into small groups to take a look at this, and particularly the article that follows. And this is where I think we can really think about this as anthropologists. So these two links here, and there's sort of one response, but thinking about the term that I could have never predicted would come to be, right? The coronavirus influencers. So who decides what's going to get our attention? It's quite interesting to me. So what I'd like for you to do, we'll take about 10 minutes to work on this, and then we'll come back together as a group. And let me know just what you notice. You don't have to read the whole thing. But I'd like for you to think in small groups about what your go-to practices would be to evaluate what this source is. They can be sort of what you would do on your own, say, Kami, if you saw this a couple weeks ago. Do you absorb this information passively? Do you look to authorship? Do you look to comments? Where do you go, and what do you do to think about what the value of this piece might be? And we've got the benefit of a little bit of time now since it's publication. And speaking of publication, right, maybe thinking a little bit about medium.com. What can we know about medium.com? So in this roughly 10 minutes, I'd like for you to chat about that and then consult with these two links as well. See if you find anything helpful in getting a handle on this. Does that make sense? I don't hear a no, so I'm going to assume that's a yes. So I'm going to stop my screen sharing, and I'm going to break us into small groups here. Breakout rooms. Oh, we're 17 now, great. This will be randomly generated, I believe. But if you find yourself in the same room with the same people every time, do let me know. Okay.
I'm Sean Gallagher, and I'm a photographer and filmmaker focusing on the climate crisis and global environmental issues. I have come to Japan to learn how businesses are trying to conserve water and protect forests as part of their work.
Welcome back. Okay. All right, so I have arbitrarily selected a couple of reps from each group. I'd like to hear from you first, and then your roommates can chime in on this question of how to approach a source, personal habits, best practices, things like that. So I'd like to hear first from Mikai's group, then Simran's group, then Amy's group, and then Karina's group. You can unmute yourself and just let me know what you discussed and sort of how your conversation flowed.
Yeah, so we discuss a lot about like using various social media outlets just to find news, and then in those social media outlets that we find reputable, finding people who are posting that we find reputable. And even from there, it's like going through what everybody else is saying in the comments and the responses, and like how people are fact checking each other a lot online. And like even though there is a lot of news that is just going around that is completely false, a lot of people are just like working with the information they have at hand. And like as new things develop, people post more and like respond to each other and try and update the situation.
And what were some of the, you said more reliable social media? What made the list?
Well, I mean, of the rest of us, like Kami was using Reddit a lot, Phoebe's using Twitter, and Andrew's using like different Facebook posts and stuff. Personally, I've been using Facebook a little too much, but yeah, so like we've it's a pretty wide variety.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Mika and Simran's group. What'd you talk about? Oh, can't hear you.
Yeah.
There you are. Good.
We talked about how if we're reading these articles like on our own time, we are probably not as rigorous about checking the sources as we should be and are taught to be and know we should be. And the number one thing that we look at is the author. But like, for example, in this article, it just has his name and his picture, and you have to like click on it to see his credentials. And even when you do, like, none of them have anything to do with epidemiology or public health. So yeah, that was something that we all admitted. And then also what Mikai said, like, people kind of vet each other online, and the responses to this article, like a lot of the comments are, where did you get your sources, like what are your credentials and stuff like that.
Yeah, I generally avoid the comments section of articles. I hear that's where all the nastiness hangs out, but I think that there is a sense in which, I don't know if I go so far as to say sort of the truth will out with these posts, but it is helpful. You can see over time how the sort of the demand for additional information kind of builds. And so when the article was first published, he had no background listed, no information but his name. And I understand that medium.com is a self-publishing platform. So then he added kind of, oh, I do have some degrees. And then the question was, well, but are they the right degrees? And then so-and-so weighs in and says, oh, I'm an epidemiologist. These look pretty good. And I'm like, okay, great, it's valid. And then I realized, wait a minute, that could be what do you call them, a bot or a troll, or that could be anybody. So just the susceptibility this is what interests me so much. Because I'm personally, yeah, go ahead.
Right, Rachel was talking about how like the list of epidemiologists and experts that he provides is like mostly celebrities, even though it is like a long list.
Is it Margaret Atwood retweeted this? And I'm thinking, oh, I love Margaret Atwood. She's a goddess, but she's a novelist. Right. Yeah, it's tricky stuff. Okay, thank you. Amy's group, what did you discuss?
We talked about how like there's a lot of information and a lot of graphs in this article, and how it's like not necessarily like the easiest to read. Also at the end, when they like include like all the languages like that it's been translated to, we're like talking about how they can be sure that it's translated correctly. Like they can't understand the language. How do you know they didn't like just like falsify the information?
Yeah, indeed. One comment, I believe this was in the corresponding Twitter influencers piece that I posted, that's kind of, I think, derived from this a little bit, dealt with a sort of maybe more of a philosophical, ethical question about, is it better to get approximate information or information that might be okay, not great, not perfect, out fast? This notion that Twitter is always a day or two, even maybe at this point just a half day ahead of CDC announcements, ahead of what the White House is going to say, or whatever it might be. Is it better to get things out faster and then sort of fix them later in a moment like this? But that goes to the question of translation for sure. This is clearly not a peer review situation where in the sort of the wheels of academia, it would usually be months, not years, to get things vetted enough to be publishable. So totally different time scale. Great. Okay, and Karina's group. I see your lips are moving. I don't hear you.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
So we also talked about how it's interesting now that like celebrities will be, before they have like a live Instagram concert or something, they'll be like, check out the WHO link below or something, and they'll just kind of mention it before, like, probably, I don't know, it's not necessarily that they'll even be giving talks on the disease, but like we were also talking about how like it's interesting that like once people started gathering publicly, it became sort of like this shameful kind of stigmatized mentality on like, not that people were publicly shaming others, but it's like quickly became looked down upon, and we were talking about how it's like best in all these situations to err on the side of being overly cautious. I think just like across the board in terms of like social, like even I guess a bit with stigmatizing certain actions, just so people really understand like the gravity of the situation. But it's also interesting that even when celebrities are doing something like more lighthearted, or like I've seen a lot of like good news, like positive news shows, they will still refer to like a reputable link right before like CDC or WHO. So.
And when you said stigmatizing certain actions, what types of actions were you referring to?
Like when people would kind of post themselves hanging out in a group, or I guess it's also, I think what I was thinking about was also a lot of like the Florida spring breakers, and I saw like a lot of memes that were kind of like aggressive, like, oh, these people are gonna ruin it for everyone, and things like that, where it kind of came off almost humorously, but it seemed to me as if like everyone was kind of on the same page, like this is wrong, like this. Yeah, I don't know. I think I was mostly thinking about people who are just like, I don't care, I'm still gonna hang out with my friends and do stuff like that. And I've noticed it's definitely swung back side of like people like, I mean, maybe if they do that, they won't really talk about that anymore.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll just one observation, because I'm curious if just thinking about the I don't know that they're generational divides, but let's say there might be some generational divides that are being amplified by media portrayals of what my 70-something downstairs neighbor would call the irresponsible generation. And he's talking about you, right? And I was asking him why in St. Louis, I can't remember if we discussed this last week, but why in St. Louis are some, as of last week, were something like 100 out of 400 confirmed cases in the 20 to 29 age group. And he just said, oh, it's the irresponsible ones. So I kind of, well, this is something you hear. This is something you will hear, right? And so I appreciate this kind of critical response to these kinds of generalizations. But something that came out, I think it was yesterday, maybe in the record, but it might be a message that many of you received, was a little bit of pushback from a Brown School faculty member. Her name escapes me at the moment, but writing about the discourse around it's only older people who are harmed by the idea that only is the qualifier, saying, actually older Americans are important people too, still, vital contributors to society, to the economy, and all these different reasons why this is not well, thank goodness, no one should feel relieved by this, but that reveals a kind of a cultural bias of ours when we think about who needs to worry and why we should be concerned. Absolutely. Okay, any other feedback for me or for the group that you'd like to share around how you approach this type of source, assuming you haven't so totally maxed out on this by now that you just are tuning it out, which is actually, I think, a healthy response as well at times. Ready?
I think, at least for me,
Yeah.
when I see a source with like a lot of graphs and a lot of infographics, I'm like, default, I think that it's like a good source, just because they're like easier to absorb the information from. But when like my group was looking at the article, like a lot of the graphs in it, he just like made himself.
Yeah.
So in reality, I guess they're not that much more reputable than like his words, but just default for me, if I see those graphs, I think, oh, this must be a good source.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's the power of, I think, in general, and this is something we'll sort of transition to discussing the content of the articles for today. it's incredibly seductive, isn't it? Just to feel like you want to know, and perhaps it's this moment of disorientation where I want to know where we are on that. Is that exponential growth? Is that linear growth? I want to know where we sit. I want to know that we're flattening the curve. I want proof. I want to know it's working. And that also, I think, is a reflection just of our need for instant information and instant answers. And it's real difficult, especially now, but in general, I think for us, it's difficult to tolerate uncertainty, right? Especially when it strikes us close to home. So, well, thank you for this. So I hope you'll continue again. We'll have our usual news in the morning, but oh, there's a hand, and it's Jack's.
Yeah, like I just wanted to add on to that. Like I think, like the combination, like this, like collision basically of living in a social media world where like we have this like super strong desire for knowledge and like to keep adding on and like to like always be one step ahead and like creating this vacuum for fake news, but also like the time of like political divisiveness is like a major factor as well, and that people don't trust the government, and the like sources that are supposed to be like who are counting on, like, so they're like it's basically fallen onto this. There's a split in the narrative between the federal government and the local governments, and both are saying, like, both are authority figures, but they're both saying different things, and so like they're going on these narratives and like it's like parallel lines, right? And everyone's trying to stay one step ahead of the curve on social media, but you're hopping on to different different narrative tracks, and it's impossible for anyone to like sort out truth from fake, like falsehood, I guess, when like the people you're supposed to have like real information from are so split on the messaging.
No, absolutely. That's a great point. And I think it bears out, there's at least one figure we can look to try and understand these ripple effects of the polarized moment we're in, which might be presidential approval ratings, which are up, very much up, I think roughly 60% right now. But what's interesting to me about that is that we have to think about presidential approval ratings in the context of national crises, right, and global emergencies. So, right, generally, the approval ratings would be much, much, much higher at a time like this. And so I think that, Jack, I see your, yeah.
Like I also was like trying to think about that too, because it's really interesting.
What to do with that?
I mean, like the audience that I follow on Twitter is like ripping into the president, but also if you look at where the virus currently is expanding and where it's affecting, it's really like mostly cities. It hasn't grown and like really wiped out like a whole state yet. It's still like majority collected in like urban population centers, which also tend to be like liberal population centers. So like where you have that comparison of like if the virus isn't on like a widespread scale, there are obviously rural and more suburban communities that are being tremendously affected, but the conservative voter that typically is not in an urban population center hasn't seen the effects of the virus as it has been in urban centers.
Sure,
so that can affect the perception of disease response when the world around you is not quite as affected.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. No, this is, and let's take that thread of urban and rural and sort of situate ourselves, thinking maybe more in a global context. I'm going to share my screen with you again and walk us through a couple of links here, and as we move on to the articles. So just things to consider. So for example, this, by the way, this is another newish or newly updated source that I've now posted under news as well, if you're uncertain about where to look. So here's some of the news coverage of COVID-19 is shifted this week. as maybe we're getting a little bit of a handle on how to manage this in the United States, but what about other parts of the world? And of course, for our purposes, what about Asia? What about different parts of Asia? So I think this is a very short video, but I think you'll be able to hear it. So I want you to think about that question of the urban and the rural.
जो था वो खाया, अब आगे गुंजाइश है नहीं, कहाँ से खाएंगे? चलिए जा रहे हैं सर। आती जाके 500 किलोमीटर दूर है, एक हफ्ता लग जाएगा। काम भी नहीं लग रहा, कुछ खाने पीने के भी लीजिए नहीं है, बच्चे घर पे हैं, वो भी परेशान, हम भी परेशान।
Right, so just a short clip there, but something that interestingly, if I didn't know any different, I would absolutely think that could be sort of footage from any number of environmental, political, right, health problems, sort of crises that were affecting India. And so I think that seeing crowding like that is not what's surprising, but seeing a headline that reads social distancing is a privilege of the middle class is definitely what feels new to me about that. And so if we want to think in some kind of more complicated ways about the idea of certain populations within a country being more affected than others or affected differently, I think that's where we can then begin to consider. I'm going to try and share with you here. Got our two pieces, and I'd like to start with the shorter piece. Going into full screen here. That is not the shorter piece, this is the longer piece. Here we go. This is the short sort of five, 6 page article that is introductory, but again, we've got Kleinman, who you remember from Illness Narratives, which, by the way, I'm almost through them. You will be getting them back this week. They are fantastic. In any event, I wanted to try, and actually, I'd like to experiment with using the annotate feature here if we can. As you see, you probably see some of my highlights that I've already made. I wanted to see what would happen if we were to take, say as a keyword, biosocial. I've already searched for it here. Oh, good, someone's got it. I see. So somebody's got a red pen out already. This is good. And think about what it means to, in this case, put Asian flus in ethnographic and political context. So what's the first thing that you notice about the title of this article? Yep. Okay. Anything else? Good. You've got the anonymous red pen. Anybody have a different color pen? I'm sort of curious about the first two words, Asian flus. This article is from 2008. And the question I want to ask, yeah, the pluralization of Asian flus. Sort of this idea, yes, there's our beloved Kleinman, who I hope you all know. No, he was the moderator of the discussion panel video that we watched for last week. He didn't talk as much, but just toward the end. So what's interesting to me as someone who didn't previously know much about this or hadn't thought much about this is that Asian flus sounds so broad as to be unhelpful to me as someone who's not a specialist. Asian flus, I want to say, well, which one, when, what does that even mean? So clearly there's sort of a body of knowledge. There's a literature that's being built up around this. And most of it, I think, has really been generated since 2000, sort of since the SARS outbreak in 2003. Okay, oh, I see, look, we've got, oh, whoops, I just scrolled and, okay, this answers one question. Do our annotations follow us? Looks like they do. In which case, see if maybe I can expand this a little bit. Lucy, I see you laughing. Kind of there. Let's use arrows, then because your names are attached to the arrows, then I'll know who you are. Connor, you're pointing to it. Why don't you go ahead and read us this abstract here.
Yeah, no problem. This collection highlights some of the social, cultural, political, and economic factors that must be considered in developing a biosocial approach to pandemic influenza control and prevention. To date, most discussions of the current spread of the avian influenza and the predicted human influenza pandemic have lacked rigorous analysis of the local context in which flus arise and in which the effects of a pandemic would most strongly be felt. Such local engagement is necessary to the development of an effective and ethical program of epidemic control. The papers in this special issue take a step towards filling this gap by exploring the local moral worlds associated with the avian influenza in China, Indonesia, and Thailand.
All right, thanks. Yes, excellent. You're getting 5 stars. Oh, it's only a scale of 5, my friend. Okay, so I see a term that strikes me as very important, and I guess I should find my annotation tools, is, unless someone beats me to it, there's a word that makes a couple of appearances here that seems pretty important as far as what is the intention, what's the intervention here? We're thinking about, okay, it's 2008. Yeah, I agree. Local moral world and local context. Okay, so what does this mean? So there's an idea that we need a more rigorous analysis of how Asian flus are being experienced in specific places in Asia, right? So China, Indonesia, Thailand. And this again is just very introductory text, but it's essentially the justification for the medical anthropologists, right? Thinking through what this, I guess I have to get out of my annotation if I want to scroll through. Okay, woo. All right, so let's take a moment. Conveniently enough, this area in pink, I think, is still where I'd like to take you next. So here are some of these questions. WHO makes another appearance. We've got this language. Oh, you can see my arrow, correct? So to date, most human cases have occurred in rural or peri-urban areas. So this is supposed to be, WHO generally, a pretty reliable, authoritative source. And I think what Kleiman et al. Are doing here is trying to unpack some of this apparently neutral language that is meant to describe, right? It's just a fact sheet, right? Fact sheet on avian influenza. And I guess I'll ask, who shall I ask? Let's see, Morgan, could you read this paragraph right here? This quotation? If you can find it.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Sorry, I had trouble unmuting myself.
No problem.
Today, most human cases have occurred in rural or peri-urban areas where many households keep small poultry flocks, which often roam freely, sometimes entering homes or sharing outdoor areas where children play. As infected birds shed large quantities of virus in their feces, opportunities for exposure to infected droppings or to environments contaminated by the virus are abundant under such conditions. Moreover, because many households in Asia depend on poultry for income and food, many families sell or slaughter and consume birds when signs of illness appear in a flock, and this practice has proved difficult to change.
Thank you. Okay, so this, I think maybe it's this last line that interests me most, and I think perhaps our anthropologists as well. These practices prove difficult to change. So then these follow-up questions emerge, right? If we want to think about this local context, why do households keep small poultry flocks in Thailand? Why do they allow animals to roam freely? What's different, right? Poultry economies. We certainly have a massive poultry economy in this country. What's different? Meaning in the United States, what's different in Asian countries? So, so again, that's sort of the spirit of this emerging literature. And I'm going to move your faces again back to the top. So the biosocial approach. I had meant to check back to keywords today, but you know who you are. Have we got biosocial approach or biosocial up on our keywords yet?
Yeah, I added that one.
Terrific. What'd you
want
give
me
it?
to? I just said it's just a way to like understand diseases and disease vectors and how diseases spread besides the biomedical definition.
Right, absolutely. So here we've got this idea that literatures or disciplines are often talking sort of in completely distinct kind of realms, and publishing, of course, in different journals and so forth, and not talking to one another. So that's what this means, this idea of a classically differentiated domains of knowledge, right? Imagine that departments, biology, anthropology, have these sort of hard lines, hard borders. So we talk a lot about multidisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity in this class, but as far as what it means now, and and when it comes to thinking about Asian flus, the biosocial approach. So how can we get at this problem of inseparable interactions among biological, social, political, and the environmental? Oh, Simran, you have an arrow there. Were you pointing at something?
That was an accident.
Okay, no problem. We're still adjusting. So something, and then I think we can just want to highlight a couple more points, and then we can tuck into Kate Mason's really incredible piece. Yes, I had marked this section as well. So this notion that avian flu control, and this gets back to maybe the question of in the WHO excerpt, right? A practices prove difficult to change. Changing a practice of in relation to sort of poultry economy would constitute some sort of control, whether it's the state control, public health officials control. Right here, we've got this anecdote about Thailand's Ministry of Health. How can we, I'll just read the quote here. Avian flu control is not a neutral event. Rather, and this won't come as a surprise, I don't think, to any of you, there's all kinds of other outside influences. Agribusiness, right? Political protectionism. What else is affecting the control or the lack of control of avian flu, which I think hopefully by now most of you have enough of a handle on this to, although I'm happy to spend some time on it, but to distinguish again between the sort of the avian strain that's connected to influenza and then the coronaviruses that we're sort of talking about in a comparative sense, but I don't want to risk conflating the two. This fascinated me. This will be the last thing that I'll point to. Thinking about local details. And we don't read the actual papers here, but let's see if I can get back to it. This line, farmers, here we go. Farmers whose livelihoods were completely dependent on their small flock of birds were more concerned about humans infecting their birds with a virus than they were about birds infecting humans. So from where I sit, it's hard to imagine a world in which that's the way that concern flows, and that's the way And this is the Indonesian case, which of course, never too soon to be thinking about final projects, but if you're interested in following up on any of these sources, we've got them over here. But this seemed very significant to me as far as figuring out what accounting for local experiences of, right, Asian flu, of avian flu and so forth, might look like. How would we do this methodologically through participatory observation, interview, and so forth? Right, another example here, thinking about what's at stake in what the authors here call the discounting of local rationalities, right? If we assume that small scale or so-called backyard farmers are scientifically misinformed, but then they happen to be right about something like risk of infection, right? Whereas this first example of worrying about humans infecting birds seemed counterintuitive to me, this latter observation about the risk of infection in farms, backyard farms being lower than the risk of infection in commercial farms, seemed all too natural, if not obvious, to my eye as a reader. So then I was thinking about, wow, this is right, absolutely serious consideration of farmers' insights should be happening. And it made me wonder about whether we're getting better at this, right, in these last, say, 12 years that have passed since this article was published. So if that's the takeaway, this lack of singularity, right, things are not experienced the same on the ground in all places. If we have to take into account local experiences, local context in any ethical global response program, I wonder then, I'm going to switch to the Mason article, how we can do that. So I've gone quite happy with my yellow highlighter here. I'm going to erase our scribbles here. Erase. Clear. They're all drawings. There we go. Fresh start. And I'd like to hear from you. I know we've probably got a couple more keywords, and I think we've got a number of responses, which I'm going to leave this screen up. I'm not going to turn to those just now, but this article, when I first looked at it, did not prove to be, right? So in thinking about the question of local experience and particularly here, the racialization of people, the racialization that Mason describes is not what I was expecting to read. Anybody else surprised? So what is happening then here? Whether or not you were surprised, I can't see all of your faces now, but can you help to set the scene just briefly? Where are we? When are we? Yeah, Simran.
Well, it's about how H1N1 was racialized as a Euro-American disease by the Chinese government.
And how is that? That's a piece of it, absolutely. How is that happening? This line here, we'll go back to the title, sure. This is a quote, actually, or it's a sort of a paraphrasing in some cases, but a sort of a sentiment that the author, Kate Mason, who actually was just a year ahead of me in graduate school, so I was actually in classes with her leading up to this this moment in her research, which I have pink markers going down here now, which I've highlighted. And at the time, gosh, I remember thinking, this is a really interesting project, but what are the odds this is really going to happen again, right? So thank goodness she stuck with it. In any event, H1N1 is not a Chinese virus. Who's saying that? What does that mean?
Well, when I first read that, I thought they were just trying to say that like the virus didn't come from China. But I think the quote was actually from like the Tianmai officials who said that like H1N1 is a disease that like specifically targets people of who like aren't of Chinese racial identity. because they talked a lot about how it like targets Euro Americans and like Mexican people of those racial identities, and that it wouldn't affect like Asian identities as much because of their racial background.
Mm-hmm. And I think you said, absolutely, thank you, Lucy. I think you said they. Who is the they that you're thinking of? I'm going to try and scroll us through here a little bit. Oh, I need to. Okay, go ahead.
The one that I remember is just the mayor of Chiang Mai. I think he made a statement like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's let's see if I can find this. Right, I've tried to highlight some of the sections of this piece that I think are most striking. Here we go, because it's not only and again, this Chiang Mai is a pseudonym, or she's altered the place names here. But this quote from Dr. Yang, this microbiologist, it seems susceptibility has something to do with race. What fascinated me about this piece is this, which I think Mason tries to summarize with this keyword, right? Which isn't in the article's keywords list, but the notion of epidemiological bilingualism. Is that one up on our keywords list? Can anybody check for me? It is. Cynthia, did you offer that one? Or is that somebody else?
I actually did the medical bilingualism.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah. But it was more or less like, I think, along the same general line, medical bilingualism and epidemiological bilingualism. It's just, I think, I guess like the main gist of it was just kind of realizing that there's different ways of interpreting different things, and it's really like, again, based on like that context and what the individual is, I guess, seeing and like wanting to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Could you say that one more time? I think that's a great way of putting it.
Sure. So I think it just both like medical and epidemiological bilingualism depends on like the context and like what the person or the individual who is like thinking about these like, I guess, situations are seeing and like wanting to like believe, and what their truth is, I think.
Yeah, so maybe that's how when Mason observes, my informants subscribe to standard, right, informants, which would include epidemiologists, right, and local political officials, but medical doctors, absolutely, at the same time as they subscribe to sort of racialized ideas of vulnerability that are actually quite the opposite of what accepted understandings of how disease spreads. See if I can find the exact section here. In any event, so we have kind of a number of moments in this piece in which I think we're seeing sort of a similar flow of sort of the narrative that's emerging around SARS, around H5N1, and then we see this happening again today. Oh, there's our very own Maidzan, who we've already read as well. This is something that I think you're probably still hearing a little bit. This kind of language of exoticizing one dietary practice over another, and the suggestion that that's really sort of the origin of the problem. But we see just to go back to sort of where we started, there are two different kinds of racialization happening. And so one has to do with SARS and one has to do with H5N1. And can somebody please remind us what the difference is here as Mason outlines it?
Well, I think one of the main differences is the origins of the two, and like the difference in place that they come from.
Mm-hmm. And
And
who are you?
Connor.
Connor. Hi, Connor. Yeah, can you let's see. I'm going to try to scroll to the relevant page here.
I think the H1N1 was from Mexico, from like a pig farm.
Right.
And then the SARS was from I'm not sure, like southern China.
Right. So that so there's a notion. And what is the sort of in terms of discourse, what is the difference in terms of how vulnerability or a sense of vulnerability or susceptibility to either virus is being explained in Mason's field site?
Oh, we kind of touched on earlier, but like people in like southern China didn't think that they could be infected with H1N1 due to the gene differences, which I thought was kind of fascinating because I had never heard of that before. Like I had no idea that people were like is that true, or was that just like?
You've gotten at the core of the question here, I think.
Because I was like, I've never heard that before. Like I haven't heard anyone talking about that with the coronavirus. So I was just kind of surprised.
I'm glad that you were surprised. So can you phrase that as a question one more time?
Do differences in genes affect the transmission of different diseases and their origin?
It's fine, by the way, if you've got, or I hope you've even got your own copies of the article pulled up on your screens. But I would love for us to just spend our last couple of minutes here trying to look for evidence of at least what Mason would have us think about this. Is it true? I'm going to scroll through and try to find something on my copy. And maybe we should narrow the scope of this question to the actual Pearl River Delta region where Mason is working. So I have one thing that I will offer here under this section called epidemiological disjunctures, and it might be actually a good place for us to pick up when we reconvene on Thursday. But I'll just read this. So Mason is interested in the specific, as she calls it, the particular racialization process that's happening. And she describes it as contrasting sharply with present day understandings. These would be, we can, I guess, summarize this as biomedical understandings of infectious disease. So these biomedical understandings, right, hold that those native to a place where a virus emerges and circulates are less rather than more likely to be infected, because long-term exposure allows the body to adapt and learn how to defend itself. Right, so natives of a particular place build up partial immunity. So this, I think, gets at your question of, is it true, Connor? And then she provides us other examples that help us to maybe generalize a little bit: sickle cell anemia, malaria, and then is ultimately returning to the question down here. So how can we know this? The medical community, and still think or feel or kind of discuss this particular H5N1 outbreak in a way that's contrary to epidemiological teachings. I'm going to unshare my screen here. Oh, is somebody trying? Oh dear. Adriana, welcome back. I didn't mean to give you the boot there. I think maybe I won't maximize my screen as much. It's harder for me to see what's happening. It is 11:20. I am going to stay on for another 10 minutes or so because I realized that one way of trying to simulate what we had in our classroom includes not immediately ejecting everybody. So if you would like to linger for a few minutes, that's absolutely fine. You can use this time to talk with one another. But I think that we should start on Thursday where just with this question. So the question, I can put this in an email, but I'm gonna put it in the chat box too. Is it true? So we'll put it this way. This is sort of a brief summary. I should probably put Asian flu in quotation marks there, but let's plan to look at this. I think we're reading more Mason for Thursday, but it's an important thing to consider because when reading these articles, one thing that can be very tricky is distinguishing from what the author's argument is and what the discourse is, and we don't want to risk reproducing something they're actually writing against. So this was an experiment, but I appreciate your doodles. I'm doing some smiles, which makes me nervous. Welcome back, Mikai. Hope you had, it's such a relaxing sunset where you are.
It really is.
Well, if I could hang out on the beach when I was doing class, I'd be, you know, pretty relaxed too. Okay, so yeah, so I'm still here. If you need to go, I understand. But we will spend one more session talking about this general problem of how we learn to discuss and interpret and experience Asian flus or into pandemics. And then we're going to try to, after that, sort of return to a sense of some semblance of our original syllabus plan. So just so you know what's coming. I get some nods. Okay, there we're getting some waves. Okay. Please unmute yourself to say farewell. It makes me nervous when you all go quiet like that.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Oh, also,
hi, Adriana.
So my computer just ended up like running out of charge, and I didn't notice.
Oh, bummer. That's all right. That's all right. So how long were you gone? Were you
like 1 minute? I just had to move to like closer to an outlet. So
oh, no problem at all. That's good. I just wanted to make sure you weren't gone for hours. Fana, where are you in the world? I'm super envious of your
no, this is
parodies.
Florida Keys. So I'm hanging out with Ernest Hemingway back here.
And then what is it, the 6-toed cats or the 10-toed cats?
Yeah, six toes. Got a bunch of them back there.
They're not civet cats, are they?
Not what?
Not civet cats, are they?
What's a civet cat?
So the civet cat was the animal that was scapegoated. This is just from the article we were just talking about, but the animal that was scapegoated for starting the SARS outbreak, which there was this very interesting line that I stuck on a bit. Maybe we could start there, where essentially the civet cat, which is like a raccoon-like kind of exoticized species that is sold at wet markets, kind of like the pangolin of 2003, maybe, was actually exonerated, right? Was found to be not culpable as if there's any intentionality to this with non-human animal species, but was found to be not culpable, but is still in the popular imagination kind of blamed. That in fact, it was humans who gave the civet cat the virus rather than the other way around. But anyway, that's why I was asking if I don't think there are any civet cats in Florida.
Yeah, for sure. And so right after, or just at the end.
Okay, Adriana, we'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, bye.
Hang in there, bye.
There's this interesting kind of passage on 511 for the Mason. I kind of found it like right at 1120, like rediscovered it. But,
oh, perfect. Okay, we can start there on 511. Got it. Okay, yeah. This is where the top, the line about scapegoating Cantonese hedonism? Or lower down?
No, it starts with some of my informants applied the same logic to H1N1.
Ah, okay. Got it. I'm marking it.
Cases.
Yeah.
And so I guess they were saying that the let's see, Tian Mai's immigrant identity would protect the city, which is, I don't understand that a little bit, because I thought immigrants would be more, like they were stating that immigrants would be more susceptible.
Right. So there's this is why, and it's good that you're surprised, and there's a lot of apparently contradictory information happening here. And I think what Mason is doing is trying to show how the kind of intermittent and subjective racialization of SARS, H5N1, like it kind of flows in different directions, but along political lines. So thinking about, there's the question of whether the sort of casual, in some ways, dismissal of vulnerability of Chinese populations to the so-called Mexican H1N1, but which I think does not actually carry any evidence-based merit at all. But nevertheless, right, the idea that there's a certain logic that, oh, good, this comes from another place. It's for Euro-Americans or whatever. This like, what race are Mexicans anyway? There's sort of these common issues. But speaks like a complete.
There was a part in there that said something like that.
Right. So no, basically, people have not thought too much probably about the Chinese epidemic. One second. Point is, though, I was going to say that SARS, there's a different sense of vulnerability there because there's an understanding that it is of Chinese origin, but which Chinese, I think, is the question. So there's an internal, if we can think, China is such a vast and ethnically and sort of linguistically diverse country, that there's a sense of North and South, like a racialization of the Cantonese speaking people, Cantonese wet markets, Cantonese practices as being responsible, right, as being sort of different, other within China. And so the fact that Tiananmen is an immigrant city means it's safer because it's considered like a, if you will, as the discourse would go, sort of a haven from a more diverse, urban, more northern pocket in another way dangerous.
Where is it located?
So the Pearl River Delta is
that southern China?
Yeah, exactly. So Guangdong province, and I'm gonna make a note to start with maps. We should map this out. That will be helpful, I think.
Because that makes more sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. So we'll start with maps on Thursday, but would suggest that this is sort of a border area connecting southern China to Hong Kong, and that's where it is. We do know sort of the site where transmission spread from China to Hong Kong, and then sort of via one doctor. We'll read about that for Thursday. But anyway, I'm glad that you were a little thrown off by this, because that's kind of the point. So you picked
Well,
up
yeah,
on
I was.
the spirit of it.
This is surprising.
Yeah, no, it really is. It really is. So I'll try to clean up a very messy discussion a little bit for Thursday.
Yeah.
But,
I mean,
thank you for-
I was interested in it because, like, I'm kind of I'm a chemistry major, and so I'm interested in, like the science behind, genetic transmission, and if like a virus is mutating and adapting to a certain set of genes, I was looking for like the scientific explanation behind it, not just like a political move or anything like that.
Yeah,
So,
and that's going to be, there will be pieces of it alluded to and even sometimes cited in these articles, but it will be probably Mason's focus here is going to be more on the manipulation of, or this sort of idea of a bilingualism, that one can be both trained in sort of standard, what are now kind of widely accepted epidemiological views of transmission, and still be operating in this at a very in a political context that's going to shape how this kind of selective kind of affiliation with what is considered medical fact, truth now, and what seems true or what feels true.
Yeah.
So I say keep that sense of skepticism and confusion for Thursday. We'll kick things off where we've left it now.
Sounds good.
All right, take care.
Okay, see ya.
Bye.